This is a great response. Let's take a travel through time. And when we go back to first century CE, then what you would see is that the Roman government, which has been in control of Judea for the previous 100 and so odd years, was now in a state where every year, even though they had made concessions to the Jewish people to not have to worship and put a statue of Caesar inside their synagogue, and they wouldn't have to give worship to Caesar once a year, they had established that they would simply pay a temple tax. You see this in the portion where Jesus tells his disciples to open up this fish mouth and you will find some money and render unto Caesar what is Caesar. They are paying the temple tax to not have to violate their religion and worship Caesar. Although they had made concessions for the Jewish people every year around Passover, because Passover told the story of how they escaped out of Egypt in the clutches of such a tyrannical ruler. And when Moses did so, he did so with flair and flash and parted seas and brought about plagues. And when they were hearing these stories being told again at Passover about how the firstborn of all of Egypt was smited, about how the cattle were killed with hail and the cattle were killed with disease and boils, and then the daring escape of crossing the Red Sea, and after that conquering many nations and the creation of what they believe to be their ancient state of Israel. These stories being told while being under the Roman government, a far greater enemy than the Egyptians were during the time frame of Moses. These stories, the crowd certainly the crowd was up. The crowd was ravenous and looking for a Messiah who would bring about the same thing Moses brought to the children of Israel, who had been in 400 years of slavery. And from their perspective, for the last 500 plus years, they had been under Babylonian control and they had been under Persian control. And although they had Greek control and they had the Hasmonean dynasty for just a minute, to show them that it's possible for almost 100 years, we were free of the Greeks. So it's possible. And they had that. And then the Greeks came back, and then they had the Roman control. So within their mindset, the possibility was there for them to rule themselves. So every year at Passover, you had many people claiming to be the Messiah. You had many people who had followings. And with Yeshua being as common of a name as John is in America, as Jose is in the Hispanic and Latin community, it was a common name. And Josephus himself wrote about 4 different Jesuses or Yeshuas, whether this Yeshua had a brother named James. But that Yeshua is not the one that flipped tables and went through a trial. He wrote about different Yeshuas who claimed to be the Messiah as a demonstration within his annals that this was a common thing that happened, that every year at Passover, there was always somebody who was claiming to be the Messiah. And this incensed Pilate to such a degree that Pilate had crucified or punished many Yeshuas and other named people who were claiming to be messiahs, to the point that he was being called back to Rome for his cruelty. Thankfully for him, the emperor died. And so he went back to running Judea. But this was common. Every year, Pilate would do this. Every year, someone would be crucified or punished. So the story was a common theme. It was as common as seeing that whomever becomes president of the United States within a few days of them becoming president, and oftentimes even before they become president, there are people who are trying to impeach the president. This happens with pretty much every president for the last, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cycles. This is a common thing. We're used to it. It's so common that we don't even pay attention to it. So Jesus, were there multiple itinerant preachers whose name was Yeshua, who was claiming to be the Messiah, who was looking to overthrow the Roman government? Yes. Were they maybe some pacifist versions of this Yeshua in the same way we had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King? It's possible. But this story, yes, was amplified of this itinerant preacher and all of them merging into one in order to create the narrative of the first gospels and writings of so-called Paul, in order to create the story that then grew and grew, because they wanted it to be the new form of Judaism. It wasn't a new form of Judaism to move towards the true God. It was a new form of Judaism to keep the peace in the Roman government, in the lands of Rome. And it backfired. It backfired. One of the reasons why there were many different versions of Jesus and many different itinerant preachers named Yeshua is simply because when you look at the fact that in every version of the gospel, even the Yeshua character is somewhat different. He does more miracles. In one instance, he calls a woman a dog. In another instance, he tells the rich young ruler that, go away. He goes away sad and doesn't even try to show him the right passage to let him see that, hey, man, you got to get your heart right. He draws a line in the sand, which is a story that wasn't even in the original text, but he draws a line in the sand and has an opportunity to say that, okay, if you're bringing this woman up here for committing adultery, where's the man? Where's the equal treatment? Where's the fairness of equality between men and women? He doesn't do it. He doesn't do any of these things. He's a different character within himself. And because of these differences, you always go to the Gnostics, and people believe that Jesus was talking of a different God. But because of these differences, you had those who followed the writings, who followed Peter, those who followed Paul, those who followed Thomas, those who thought that the writings of Matthew and Mark and all these other apostles were the right versions, even though they weren't named that until 185. But all these different books and writings that claim to be telling the true story of Jesus created the Marcions and the Valentinians, and created Gnostics and the Lucians and many other different variations of Christianity in late first century through second century, third century, all the way up to the fourth century. You have many variations of Christianity because there was many variations of this Yeshua character, and people accepted them, believed them, still read the books of Enoch and the book of Jasher and Jubilees, believed that the secret writings of John and the Apocryphon of Adam and all these other books were valid books to be read, to be believed, and told the story. But it created even more turmoil for the Roman government, because now you have the Jewish population still revolting, and now you have the Christians fighting one another over who's the right version of Christianity. Doesn't that sound familiar? Go to any city and you will find and gather all the Christians, and they will fight over who has the right version of Christianity. Isn't that something? It's just like back in the day. Nothing has changed. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.